Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in Mavericks in Faith and Culture. We are excited to be with you back again. And boy, has there been a lot going on all across the world, but especially in the US. So before we get started, Kevin, will you open us in a word of prayer?
Yes, let's bow. Father, we thank you and we praise you for this day, this time, this season, time and season of resurrection. We thank you for your son, and we thank you for this time together, bringing us together, unifying us around these important topics. And we ask that in the end, that we'll be more unified, that we'll be more loving, that we be more considerate, that we learn of you even in very precarious times and times of chaos and times of uncertainty. We ask that you would bring clarity and strength to us individually and collectively as we go through these topics together, bring wisdom and revelation and the knowledge of you. And we just thank you in advance for what you're doing. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. So our topic or kind of our theme today is this lack mentality. And lack mentality, we talk about it in personal development, right? In self-help. We talk about it in the church. But we want to talk about it just in general with the public. And so, Neil, you put out a really good article. We just released it. We haven't pushed it out through social media yet, but we will. Talking about, do we have a lack of food? So share with us what made you write this article? What started it for you?
Yeah. So actually, I wasn't even thinking about food. I was actually doing some research on artificially grown meat. Just to understand what was going on and things about that, and the financial markets about it. Well, I came across the statement, and I'll read it. I'll quote it. It says, "We all need to eat, and there's not enough food to go around. This is arguably the most profound challenge faced globally. Lab-grown products may logically provide part of the solution." So here's a equity fund manager saying that, hey,
not even a scientist or a nutritionist, but an equity fund manager. Okay,
so
let's take
the science. He's not following the ethics. He's just following the money. And he says, well, we're running out of food, and lab-grown meat will solve the problem. And I was like, wait, here's the thing that you have to be careful about. When somebody makes a statement, don't argue about his conclusion until you argue about his premises, right? Because some people might say, I can't think of a quick example right now, but they may come up with something and say, because of this, we have to do this, and all of us like, no, we should be doing this. Well, wait, what is the because of this first? Is that true? And so my first question was, wait, are we running out of food? And that's how this all started.
Right.
And are we running out of food, Neil?
Well, so I didn't go into this in the article, but I think in the 50s, this guy came out with a book called The Population Bomb. And his whole thing was the world is on a race to self-extinction because we're not going to be able to feed ourselves. We're going to have so many people. We're not going to be able to fit on the world. We're not going to be able to have freedom of free lives. We're going to be all in poverty and all that. And it goes on and goes on and on. And everybody, all the elites said, oh, yes, this is a terrible thing. We have to ensure that we are protected at least. And a lot of elites took action, to secure bunkers. And, they just went through this whole thing about it. And part of that is they took action to secure security systems that would protect their farmlands and their food products. And, I just went on and on. Well, so I thought, well, man, that doesn't make sense at all. Well, fundamentally, you have to think about it like, look, I realize I'm coming from a biased view, but if God has asked us to multiply and take dominion over the land, you think that he would know, he would say, well, multiply, but only to a certain point. take dominion of the land, but at some point you should got to stop and, and become an environmentalist. Like, he didn't say any of that. He just said multiply and take over the land, which meant that he knew fully well that we could multiply as much as we want. So, and this is again a thing I didn't put in the article. I was in an argument with some very liberal friends at one point, and they said, they kind of gave the same diatribe about the world being overpopulated. I said, guys, have you ever calculated how much space there's in Texas? And at this point, there were like 7 billion people in the world. And they were like, what are you talking about? I said, if you took all 7 billion people and you stuck them in Texas, like just assume that everybody didn't care where they were living in Texas, but all the landmass, not counting the lakes or stuff like that, and just put them in Texas. Do you know that we could all survive we wouldn't even be at the density of downtown San Jose, right? Which is not very dense at all. We're talking a few apartment complexes. I said, we could all live in Texas, and so we'd have the rest of the land to grow food on. That's the entire world except for Texas. We could grow food on. Now, of course, that's very inefficient, because how are you going to lug the food in and out and think about the waste products and all that stuff? And so, and they were like, oh, no, that's not the right. So I said, here are my calculations. And sure enough, and today, if you do the calculations, let's say we're at 9 billion people. It doesn't change much. The density really doesn't change much. And I should do an article on that too. But the whole idea was, wait a minute, I think we're misunderstanding this. And then back then, this was about 15 years ago when I had this discussion. Back then I said, have you ever looked at hydroponics? And it turns out that you could grow, and this is very right into our IFCA concept and the farming concept. We could, with just if you take a city block, every city block of just hydroponics and multi-layer food management, you could feed 10 city blocks. I'm like, we're not going to run out of food anytime soon. And so that's where I had left it at. But then when this article came out, I started actually doing the calculation. And it turns out that you don't need to do any of that. You don't need to do hydroponics. It turns out that the American farmer back in the 1700s, or any farmer back in the 1700s, could feed maybe his family of 5. By the 1900s, the average farmer could feed 30 people. And then by the 50s, they were feeding 1,000 people. Today, they're feeding the average farmer. Now, of course, the farms are becoming bigger, but we're talking about the effort by one man. Because of the technology, because of everything, one man can feed something like 20 to 30,000 people, right? Because of the equipment. So it's not a question of, and the farms are producing far more than they used to, right? The same acreage is food. Now you could argue about, well, they're using chemical fertilizers, they're using weed killers. You could argue about whether that's environmentally a good idea, whether it's polluting things, but the idea is that we are able to produce food. So I went in and I just calculated what we are doing currently. And currently the world already produces 9.9 billion tons of food annually. So a ton of food is 2,000 pounds. And you can't eat 2,000 pounds in a year. So 9.9 billion can really feed, let's say you eat about 1,000 pounds of food a year, right? You could feed about 20 billion people with that food right now that we have, right? And that doesn't even count the cows and the goats and the sheep and the llamas and the emus or whatever else you want, and the ostriches that you're harvesting for food. It doesn't even include any of that. So right off the bat, this is pure nonsense.
Yeah, but it's fear mongering, right? And it's being done just to justify. Like, I remember when I started taking a real interest in farming, and I never paid any attention till Bill Gates talking about cow farts. Remember that? that cow farts were harming the environment, right. And therefore it was like a justification for lab meat. Basically, what you wanted to do was kill the live animals because their gas was hurting us, and therefore justify, lab grown food. And I'm like,
well, this is the smartest man in the world, right? I mean, just think about what he just said. right? And now start expanding it. And here's the problem. Let's look at the premise that he has created and analyze the premise before we analyze his conclusion. So how many cows are there in the world? And how many buffalo are there in the world? How many deer are there in the world? How many grass-eating ruminants are there in the world? You're worried about cows?
Right.
You really? Why aren't you worried about, I don't know, deer? How about zebras? Right?
Well, remember the whole premise was based on this greenhouse gas, CO2. The world's going to explode. We're all going to be underwater. I mean, you know, these greenies, right? The bottom line is, though, these are all modern day depopulationists, and they don't really they anticipate, they foresee that the world should have only about a half a billion people, 500 million people. So they want to
all controlled by
depopulate.
God.
Yeah, they want to depopulate by about 90%. And it's really because their planned, you know, society, their planned economy, and they're being the masterminds of it. They would be able to be in control of this whole thing, you know. So it's more of a pride play. It's more ego. It's more they're the overlords, and they can actually control the plebes and have everybody just kind of work at the behest of the overlords. This is not a new play. This has been with us since the 1700s. We had Thomas Malthus, who was really I think, the father of the modern
Yep.
day greenies, environmentalists. His plan was, look, you know, the world is just too crowded. You know, you know, it's finite, and therefore the food source is finite. But then we're repopulating and reproducing at a rate that's exceeding our finite commodities and capabilities, and therefore we need to. Now he was a white, he was a white supremacist, and so he said, look, we need to take these other ethnicities and stop them from reproducing. And so he worked with his first cousin, Charles Darwin, and Francis Galton, and came up with this eugenics ploy. And the idea was, look, we can get rid of the undesirables, those that are not well born, which is what eugenics means in Greek, and therefore we can depopulate, right? We can just, and
Mention the book. You have this all in your book too for people.
yeah, so it's all documented in my book, Woked Up. And it fundamentally the whole woke movement is built on this entirety of the false narrative that's been created about white supremacy and racism and that kind of stuff. And so so that's really a lot of where it comes from. You will find that all of the modern day depopulationists are all white supremacists. In other words, they see themselves as very, very different than everybody else. We're supreme. So they have a supremacy complex, and we're the ones that's supposed to run the world because we come from this upper crust that's really driving industry. In Bill Gates' case, I'm the pioneer of modern day computers and software, and these other globalist billionaires are they can assert that they're pioneers of this, that, and the other. So therefore they are the ones that are supreme and they should be running the world. Well, the world can't be run if you got 9 billion people in it spread all around the globe. They'd like to do is shrink it to about 500 million. And therefore that's a number where they can have their regional overlords manage, these managed societies. And so this is how delusional and evil these people are. And this is a real thing. This is part of the Great Reset, was to reset societies and unleash, these viruses, that'll help scale back the populations and continue to push, robust, anti-family programs and abortions and those types of things to really hold down population growth, and therefore over the next 20 years there'll be a manageable population around the globe that these regional overlords can say, can manage together, and they're the ones that are running the world. It's insidious, it's delusional, it's definitely a supremacy complex that these people have. It's terrible.
Kevin, when I'm like, if someone were to just jump in now on our conversation, they might think that, we wear tinfoil hats when we're not on camera, right? And I am concerned sometimes that our messaging is not getting through. Not that there's anything wrong with our endpoints, our goal, but let's help people understand where we're coming from, right? And first of all, this organization, these individuals you see talking right now, we are people of faith. So we believe in God. We believe that there's a creator. We believe that he had a perfect plan for the earth and that it still exists whether man sinned or not. And so this idea that somehow humanity has now grown smarter than the creator is really kind of our problem, right? Because as Neil was pointing out when he opened our discussion about, are we short on food? What we're seeing is that, I think you had said it, Kevin, one time, is there's always been climate change. Like
it changes
the
all the time.
climate has
We
always
have seasons.
the climate has always been changing, though.
Yeah.
And I mean, if we were to go back to 1300s, I mean, there were no factories polluting the air, and yet the climate was changing.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like the climate is always going to be changing. Now, I'm not trying to say that we should put trash and chemical pollution in our oceans, right? That I'm not saying that. We need to be responsible with our waste.
Yes.
But this idea of taxing the whole global environment, and now what was this we were seeing about how, I don't know if it was the European Union or somewhere, or African Union, where now they want to tax the West because of the West pollution that's harming the third world countries, right? And listen, if you're a fisherman somewhere in Asia, some of China's ships, some of our cruise ships, I'm not saying that modern civilization has not harmed our natural environment. And we're not saying that, but the idea that everyone needs to be taxed for that, the idea that now we need paper straws, right? and that needed to be our solution seems to just be complete overreach. Should there be regulations? Sure. Again, chemical companies should not just be dumping barrels and giving communities cancer, right? We are all in agreement with that, but there is some overreach. What were you going to say, Kevin?
Yeah. So even if you ask the scientists that are all in on climate change, global warming, global cooling, those are all polar opposites. We've seen climate change take on those take on those variances over time. But even if you ask them, okay, now if all of these nation states around the world fully complied with the climate limitations that you want, how much would that make a difference in global climate change? And it's like less than 1/10 of 1%. So you're telling me less than 1/10 of 1% in the change in temperature? What is that? That's not. It's almost immeasurable, the difference it would make. So all of this hysteria about the oceans are going to boil, or
The
You
snow
know,
caps are going to melt, right? Wasn't that Carrie? Who?
yeah, the beaches will
You know?
disappear, and polar ice caps, so all of them will melt.
Mm,
It's hysteria, and it's hyperbole, and it's actually just manifest lies. All right, the percentage, the amount of sacrifice all nation states would have to make in order to make one bit of difference in supposed climate change would be so nebulous the temperature variation wouldn't make any noticeable changes in the environment. So
mm,
what is it for?
mhm,
So, but it really is for, it's a scam to basically not only modify the behavior of us plebes and you know, have our children scared to death about climate change being the number one existential threat to their
Well,
future. But the
yeah,
other thing is so it can be a money grab for those that are in that globalist power,
that's
so
exactly what it is.
they can tax the rest of these industries and the rest of these you know, and do this and depopulate the planet at the same time so they can enrich themselves and enrich their power base.
And if you look at it, if you look at, if you, let's say I spend $1 billion on carbon reduction, right? Lives saved today, zero, right? Lives improved long term, maybe 1,000, right? Certainty of outcome, low. But if I spend 1 billion on dams, lives saved today about 10,000, lives improved now, millions. Right? If I spend 1 billion on commerce, starting factories, getting people the infrastructure they need to start jobs and pull themselves out of poverty, lives improve now tens of millions.
mhm,
Right? Lasting economic lift. And guess what? If you do the 1 billion commerce, they can build their own dams down the line,
Yeah.
you know, and save
mhm,
their own lives if the water really does rise. And the reality is that it's got nothing to do with saving lives, because as you said, they don't want to save lives, they want people to die. And the best way to make Africans die is to prevent them from access to the technology that allowed Americans and British and Europe to actually advance. Let's stop the fossil fuel, right? Let's stop them getting access to cheap fuel, because if you give them cheap energy, you give anybody cheap energy, they will improve their lives. They will improve commerce, they'll improve that, barring government interference, right? And I need to talk about that when it comes to food. Barring government interference, people will do far better with commerce, and they will improve their lives.
Speaking of commerce, let's hop over to tariffs, shall we?
Okay,
Yeah.
actually, before that, I want to add a couple more things on the
Okay.
food thing. So and so the food thing, the real reason that we have shortages now is due to government,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The real obstacle is tyranny. Like if you look at Africa has all the resources. They've got more minerals. They've got more irrigatable land. They've got more irrigation. They've got everything far better. But why are they starving? They're starving because of the fascist regimes, not because colonization. Yeah, colonization hurt them at the point. But remember, America was a colony. Canada was a colony. Australia was a colony. Right? It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with their current form of government.
Yeah.
Look at Venezuela. Venezuela was once the richest country in South America. I mean, beef, oil, wheat, everything. And now they nationalized the farms, prices were fixed, everybody's starving. North Korea. And look at North Korea and South Korea. Almost identical weather, identical people, identical culture. One is starving, the other one has too much money, and people are, and we have K-pop, right? You know, it's just, what? So the other thing is governments pay farmers not to grow food. It's not a question of a lack of food, it's a problem of too much food. In fact, in the European Union, they just started forcing cow owners to feed their cows some feed called Bovaer, which is supposed to reduce the methane gas. Well, guess what? It's killing the cows, right? And so what are they doing? They're damaging the whole people. This is the whole thing. They don't want people to grow their own food. And this comes right back to IFCA. right? We want people to grow your own food. You've got to grow your own food. You've got to have a backyard farm. You've got to have a backyard grocery store. Grocery farm. You've got to have chickens. You should have goats. You should have whatever you need. But the government doesn't want them to do it. And I want to add one more thing to that. The government needs to get out of a lot of parts that they are. Like, let me give you a great example. I was, we live out here in Idaho, and we have about 2 acres. We had a few cows. We ate them. So now we're going to get more cows, right? And we have a well and a septic tank. And so the other day I was talking to my neighbor. I said, man, it's so great to be here away from San Jose. I can take those 20-minute showers. He goes, 20-minute showers? He says, you know, our water supply is getting low. I said, no, it's not. Because when I take that 20-minute shower, where does the water go? It goes right back into the ground. It's going right into our septic tank, right down to the ground. It's not going anywhere. It's all staying right here, right? I'm refeeding exactly what it's a recyclable, renewable thing, right? And he said, oh, I never thought about that. I said, here's the problem. See, on our back fence is the city. Guess what happens to all their water when they take long showers? It gets trucked miles away, 20, 30, 40 miles away to a sewage plant. That sewage plant processes it, and then it sends it all out to some river somewhere. That's why the water table is going down. It should be coming right back to the place where it was sent. If everybody had their own septic tank and they had their own well, we would not be in this mess, right? And so that's the other thing is you got to bring all that back to local. So,
let me speak about government because you guys know I'm here in Africa and been here for a little while. It's amazing to see the corruption. I know that many, and I used to be with the many people who would be like, the West needs to get out of Africa. Colonization, the French, Belgium, everybody just needs to leave Africa alone. And South Africa is a good example, right? Of, what the colonization did in South Africa, raised that country's productivity and their roads and their systems to another level. And then they left. Right, and left it in the hands of the people. The corruption is like triple. And I'm here in Kenya, and
that's crazy.
How in such a big country with how are people starving? How are people's roads can't get done, projects don't get done, but they pay their parliament way too much money. I mean, their members of parliament are making more money per capita than we do in the US. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, why?
Wow.
Why? The amount of projects that say they're getting started that don't happen. The way that there are no roads, sewer systems, things like that in certain places in the country. Why? The country makes enough money. They tax the people enough.
Yeah.
But this country is in poverty because of the corrupt government. And I'm living here, listening to the politics, watching it. Yeah. And it is amazing to me that these communities of people are starving, are hungry, are homeless. And they can't believe in America that we have a homelessness problem. They're like, why? You guys have way too much money. How do you have it's still all about corruption though. I mean, I think it's corruption everywhere. It is truly the government, but it's kind of like, how do you fix that? How do you fix that without getting the right kind of people in place? But as soon as you think you get the right kind of people in place, they get corrupted too, And so there's no checks and balances here like the way that we have in the US. I appreciate that so much now, about the US, the checks and balances that we do have. That I'm not saying we don't have corruption, but I'm saying it's just not all off the scale, especially at the local level. Like
We
the
should, we
local
should do
people are
a
so harmed.
we should
Go
do an
ahead.
episode on that one of these days. I'll
Oh, what?
explain what. Well, we should do an episode on that one of these days. I'll explain why I think there is corruption in some countries and not in others, and what one of the solutions is for that. So
Okay. Yeah. We were going to head over to commerce and talk about tariffs.
Yes.
And we can definitely do that, because our whole talk today was just about lack mentality and the idea that we think that we're in a loss, that we don't have enough money. I hear it here in Kenya. People are struggling. They can't pay teachers. There are certain grades in the school system that don't have school books yet. We're 3 months into the school year, and you're telling me my fifth grader still doesn't have school books, not because I don't have the money to buy them. The system has not put them out, right? There are teachers that haven't been paid.
Mm.
And you have, okay, we're getting back into corruption. Sorry. Let me shift back to tariffs. So one of the things I remember when tariffs were first coming out, everyone was panicking, but even the thought of some countries were like, they were going to go into some complete recession if the tariffs were reciprocal, simply because they couldn't afford to pay what they charge us. And so if we stopped paying it, their whole government system would collapse. So who wants to kind of jump in and talk about just global tariffs and how this thing works?
Well, let me start by just first of all applauding the fact that we now have a president and administration that's sincere about leveling the global playing field. And what I mean by that is, in order for you to appreciate what tariffs are and what they will do, you have to appreciate where we were. To appreciate where we were, you got to understand that we lost something like 90,000 factories here in America over the past generation, let's say. That meant that all of those jobs, hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs of those middle class, lower skilled workers were gone. They were gone to these other places, Mexico, Canada, China, Philippines, wherever. Because the manufacturers here realized that they could move their plants over there, get cheap labor, and just import here with no consequence, and make a lot more by importing here. They still understood us to be the number one consumer in the world. But they wanted to take advantage of the various labor laws in these other lower income areas and then just import to America. There's no barrier to that. And so that was the scheme that had been going on for generations. Okay. So what happened to us, though, is that we were falling more and more and more in debt because of relative trade imbalances. In other words, we'd have, our GDP for export would be about $500 billion, $500 trillion, but our import would be an imbalance of about $800 million, almost $1 trillion, that we're paying for more. You know what I mean? So there's an imbalance.
Yeah.
We're losing about $300 billion in a trade imbalance every year, each and every year, which exacerbated our financial standing, which exacerbates our middle class that was being, really hollowed out. And there was just lack of economic viability and opportunity in so many areas here in America. A lot of people saw it that they can go to college, get higher degrees, but then when they did that, they're going more and more in debt, a couple $100,000 and this and that. There's all kinds of variables that people attempted to do over the past couple of generations to try to fix this. Maybe they can move into the upper class and not be associated with middle class anymore, and get higher skills, higher education, therefore it'd be higher pay, but it didn't necessarily pan out that way. Okay. So Trump comes in and says, look, China's eating our lunch, man. They're importing and exporting, and it's costing us, a lot of money each and every year. And by the way, this trade imbalance that I gave, the 500 billion to 800 billion is just with China. So and because they're their largest trading partner.
Mm.
So we were losing about 300 billion a year just with China. If you take that and you spread that across, hundreds of nations, with no relative, even reciprocal tariff, we get tariffed, exporting to them, but they don't pay anything coming in here. Then everybody's eating our lunch. They're getting the free lunch with America really footing the bill for building their economies wherever it is on the globe. So what he said is look, no more. He said we're tired of building everybody else's economy where our economy suffers. We're all in debt, and there's no way this is sustainable. We're gonna lose. America's not gonna be around. So what we have to do is go ahead and at least put up reciprocal tariffs. Whereas whatever tariff you charge us, we'll charge you. But in the case of China, since they've been eating our lunch for 20, 30 years, we're going to have to get extra tough with them and tell them, look, we're not even reciprocal. We're going to charge you a heftier tariff price, and we're going to have a balanced trade agreement with China. And so that's where it comes from. And with that, let me give you the outcome of that. With that, just because we don't have any actual new tariff deals other than the 10% flat across everybody. Well, we don't have any new tariff deals. We got 13 in the hopper right now that they're about to put the ink on. But just with the threat of that, we have 7 trillion with the T, and committed investment here in American manufacturing. $7 trillion. We're talking 70 days. This guy's only been in office 2.5 months. That's $7 trillion. That's the largest, and committed investment in America. No other president has even come close to that, especially not in a couple over 2 months. So we got $7 trillion in committed investment here, which means that we got all of these new manufacturing sites. We got additional jobs for Americans, and we could rebuild the middle class. So this is a strategic maneuver that was necessary. It was timely, and it has some short-term pain in the sense that we're seeing the stock market doesn't really know how to rationalize and monetize this over time, because you don't know what the outcome is going to be when your favorite chip manufacturer that may be in Thailand or China or some other part of the world. You don't know what that's going to really be the bottom line for them from a P&L perspective. But that's just the way it is. I mean, we're restacking the deck, and we're stacking it in America's favor. So while there's some short-term consternation and short-term pain, if you're in the stock market, yeah, I get it. We're gonna have to relax though, keep our stocks there, because I believe there'll be a huge rebound on the other side, especially with all of this additional investment that's been committed to coming here just on the threat of tariffs. And then I believe that China is going to have to come to the table. Right now, they don't have a way to really monetize China if their exports here are they're not really happening right now. Anything that's exported here right now has 145% tariff on it. So China is already right now we're making, according to Trump, about $2 to $3 million per day, each and every day, just from him putting tariffs on all these countries. China is going to be much more than that when we actually fully negotiate that deal. So bottom line is, on the up, there's tremendous upside with this, both for the family, for the middle class, and lower skilled workers, minimally educated. No slight about that, but we have a lot of workers in that category, and we can get those workers productive again, as opposed to being on disability or welfare programs and this and that. So this is a wonderful opportunity, really, to bring America back. And so that's what the tariffs are all about.
So one of the things, my general thing is tariffs are bad, unless they're used for negotiation, which is exactly what Trump is doing.
That's what he's doing.
And tariffs in general are bad because they raise the price for our consumers. And the idea is that if the jobs are low level, they should go offshore, and we should focus on better jobs. The problem is we didn't focus on better jobs. We started focusing on jobs that had no value. Colleges were putting out degrees in black studies and underwater basket weaving and transgender studies. So we weren't developing that skill set here. So we had to now import that skill set by getting people like me. Of course, I came here in the 80s when there was a shortage, but now there's so many Indians here, and they messed up that entire system. It used to be you could only come to America if you wanted to be an American citizen and you were very good at something or the other. And then they said, no, and there was nobody in America to replace you. So for me to get hired, the boss that hired me initially had to show that they had interviewed a bunch of people and I was better than anyone they've interviewed. And and none of the people they interviewed were as good as the job as I did. So I got my job. But now they moved to something called the lottery system. And the lottery system has nothing to do with expertise. And then so everybody just files. And then a few lucky people get through. So you're not getting the best people. You're not getting people that you actually need. And has nothing to reflect with whether you have those people locally or not. So in an ideal world, there are no tariffs. But we're not living in an ideal world. We're living in a corrupt world. The other thing was the reasons why things went offshore is because of unions that were pushing up the price and were bankrupting the local manufacturer. The taxes were so high, local taxes were high. The only way you could build a factory was if you went through $1 billion worth of environmental studies, right? So all these things were happening, and that's why all our manufacturing moved offshore. So tariffs are bad in general, but when things are worse at home, that's when you have to start playing the tariffs. And I think when you start looking at all that, if we can start changing this back, and here's what I think is going to happen with China. And I am not an expert on China, but here's what my guess is. China is going to have to capitulate. Now Xi is trying to show that he's the dragon, he's the emperor, because he's basically emperor for life. He's become the new Chinese emperor because he's replaced. He's gotten rid of any ability for anybody to remove him. So the problem here though is that he cannot seem weak in face of a trunk. So he's got to raise his thing. But let's understand this: China is going bankrupt. They're falling apart. They've had all this real estate speculation. They've got all these car companies that have gone public and said they're shipping billions of cars, but all those millions of cars, all those millions of cars are sitting somewhere in China in a dump heap because nobody in America wants them.
Right.
There's nobody to buy, but they're producing cars, and so their stock goes up and people buy. So they're going to go bankrupt. Here's the problem that China's going to face. If they don't agree to a tariff deal with Trump is saying, no tariffs on your side, no tariffs on my side, and we'll be happy. They refuse to do that. And guess what? Guess who's waiting for the China deal to fail? And guess who China is afraid of? They're afraid of Vietnam. They're afraid of the Philippines. They're afraid of Thailand. They're afraid of India. They're deathly afraid of India. Right? Why? Because India's going to say, hey, we'll make the iPhones. Yeah, it might take us 3 years to get there, but we'll make the iPhones. And then China's going, oh, wait a minute. We can't sit around that long. So this is my guess. My guess is in the next few months, hopefully, we're going to see China either somebody's going to have to upset Xi, or Xi is going to, and this is the right way to do it. Trump has to go and meet Xi and say, look, we'll make a deal so you can pretend to have won this, and I have won it too. We'll say we had a big conversation. We've now become friends. You and I, Mr. Xi, are now buddies. And because of this, you're going to make a concession because the Americans need help. And now you can be the winner in there. If not, he's going to be out, and Vietnam, because Vietnam is going to be in shortly.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I saw some article about how they're like, there's no way an affordable iPhone could be made in the US. It's kind of like they're saying, how can the products that we've been so used to be made affordably in the United States? And so are you saying that you believe that that is true, that at this current stage, couldn't we make affordable manufacturing?
No,
or is it going to take us some time to adjust?
Well, it's going to take, the two things are going to have to happen. One, it's going to take us time, but I believe that the American worker is far superior than any worker elsewhere, as long as they're not hamstrung by unions, right? The individual American, the individual American worker is the best worker in the entire world. That's what made America great during the war. Look at what we produced, right? Overnight, we were nothing. And then suddenly we're producing planes and guns and tanks and whatever. So I think American workers are the greatest. But the problem here is not that, is the ramping time, because we've divested from, it's going to take a while for us to do that. Now, the question is, though, can we still make it cheaper than China? Maybe not cheaper, but with robotics, I think we can come to an almost equitable place, because
robotics and AI. Yeah. But to Neil's point, even if Apple moved all the manufacturing here tomorrow, and we had they had their plant land, the full thing architected and everything else, to bring the robotics online that does this intricate work within the iPhone to make sure the AI is adapted properly and all that takes a lot of scoping and scaling, and it's probably a couple years away before we're actually there where robotics can handle manufacturing an iPhone soup to nuts. Larger parts for like automobiles and things like that, yeah, but micro technology parts that go into these little phones it's a different kind of a thing. So what that's why he removed the tariffs off of the iPhones, the computers, and those things. Microelectronic robotics they're coming online, but they're not they're quite there yet. This is they're scaling down, and pretty soon you'll be able to fully do it, but not at present.
Here's the other thing I predict. I predict that California, New York, all the blue states are going to lose out to the red states, because you want to build a plant in California, good luck with the environmentalists.
Yeah.
It'll never happen, right? You want to build a plant in Idaho? Hey, Texas, hey, come on in. So I think you're going to start seeing that big move from if this continues, you're going to see that big move away from, California will just do all the software jobs, but all the manufacturing, all the hardware stuff, because the hardware has to go closer to the manufacturing a lot of times, right? Because there's a lot of interaction.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So for the average, well, not the average. So for the, mom, when we're talking about lower scale, we're talking about low paying jobs, when we're talking about people who are in need of food assistance and SNAP, what does tariffs mean to them? I mean, they're like, I don't trade on the stock. I don't really care what the stock is doing.
The tariffs won't mean
why
much.
Does it matter?
The tariffs probably won't affect them because we're not importing that much food. We're importing food, but it's mostly dried goods and things like that. And really, in America, we grow enough food here, like Neil talked about at the very beginning. We can accommodate, our basic food resources that we need here in America, especially your standard stuff you would find in a grocery store. So we're not really importing that much food. By the time the food gets here, it's bad. So we'd have to grow. Most of our food is grown here, in America. So for your average lower income mom who's on the SNAP program, SNAP, of course, gives you access to, your grocery stores and corner stores where you can get food and those types of things. Those things aren't going to, I don't think you're going to see. What impacts them is the inflation, basic inflation. And right now, since Trump has been in office, actually, inflation has come down. It's been on the decline for the past 2 months. So the average consumer that has to go to the corner store, go to the nearest grocery store and try to figure things out. Eggs have come down. Your average cost of goods have come down from an inflationary standpoint. So you're pretty happy compared to where things were with Crazy Joe in there. Everything was expensive. It was terrible.
The place where it will go up is that mom can't go to Walmart and get in short order. Right now you still can, and get that 70-inch TV for $365. So she won't be able to do that. Right? And some cars, some used cars may go up in price.
Yeah.
But trust me, you can live with that TV for the next 2 years. It's not going to hurt you.
And energy. energy, the things that Trump has been doing about really releasing, he says, our energy so that we're able to baby drill. How is that going to affect our economy? What does that really mean for middle class, lower class people?
Energy is the primary driver for most of our expenses because America is so big, everything has to be shipped. So it's a trade, you got to ship it from one place to another. So energy is important. The other reason why energy is needed is because you've got to heat your house. You've got to drive your car, even if you have a job, right? So all these things, energy is key. If you bring down energy, a lot of prices come down appropriately, and it helps, right? Now, it's the great thing about energy is the cheaper your energy is, the more people will do, which will increase the economy. The economy starts to grow as a result of that because you have more people with more money to spend on other things, and it's all around good. So again, remember, the real good is when you produce. So if people are going out and buying junk, it doesn't help. But if they're going out and buying stuff that needs to be produced, and that production now feeds the economy, so good things feed the economy, right? And I just want to compare that because I talked about that in the book, How to Stop Racism in America. You can't say, oh, we should break windows, because then people have to buy windows. Right? And that's not going to improve the economy, right? You can't say, people all say, oh, war got us out of the depression. No, war is the worst thing for the economy. Why? Because you're just building things and burning them up or destroying them. You're not really improving anybody's life. You're actually making things worse. You just have the movement of money, but nobody's actually life is being improved. The way life gets improved is when people produce goods and services that are needed, and then the economy improves in a good way, and the whole standard of living goes up.
Speaking of standard of living, and I think we've kind of, as a country, we've calmed down a little bit from the Dodge cuts, and just scaling back on employment. But for many people, that was a huge panic, right? Of how can you tell us that laying off all these government employees is actually benefiting the country, right? So who wants to dive into just the idea? Go ahead, Kevin. That cutting back is helpful.
Yeah. So if government employees were actually productive and actually conducting productive work on behalf of the citizens, all of them at scale, we would have seen, we would have felt something. But the reality is the overwhelming majority of government workers were not working. They weren't coming in their offices. They had not been in our offices for years. We have more empty buildings now than we ever had. Federal government-owned buildings empty. Some had never been even occupied. So, and if you want to get a sense for, we do have government workers that been working their jobs and doing this. Remember the last time you went to the post office and you had just 3 people in the line. Remember the last time you went to the DMV and you had 20 people in. They take their time. Government workers were always the safest, most unproductive jobs because they couldn't get fired. They felt like, hey, it's my time. I can do what I want to do. I can serve you, or I can go out and take a smoke break and come back and serve you in a half an hour. It was just, it's ridiculous the amount of abuse that government workers would give to your paying customers. So, and that attitude was pervasive throughout government employee work. So even those that were in back offices that we wouldn't know or wouldn't see, they had this, hey, I'll do it tomorrow. It's no problem. Even if they were in the office now, let alone if they're at home. A lot of them were at home and had multiple jobs and on, vacation, on beaches. There's all kinds of stories that have come out about what the government workers were doing. So these were necessary cuts. These were not cuts where your average American citizen would feel it. These were cuts that these people weren't working. They weren't checking in. They weren't working. They weren't accountable to anybody. They were just collecting checks. It was a meal ticket.
So
So,
and this
Will we
brings us
feel the benefit of that? Do you think that, I mean, the money that is saved, will that actually trickle down to the rest of us, or, is
Yeah.
it lost somewhere?
you better believe
yeah.
You better believe it. Doge is keeping exact account for what they're saving. They say when they get to 1.5 trillion, which they expect to be by the end of the year, or they're already at over 150 billion. But when they get to 1.5 trillion, then we could talk about rebates coming back to taxpayers of $5,000 or
understand that
like
1.5 trillion is 30% of our budget, right? Which we've always been. So there's a lot of things to when you fire one. First of all, government workers don't produce anything, right? They're not producers. They're consumers, and they are limiters. Now, there are some government workers that protect us, and that's important because they allow us to produce, or they enable us with roads or whatever that allows us to produce. So those are critical workers. And as I've said in various of our books, the problem is that we're taxing everybody regardless of what they use. People should be paying fees for services. So if you use a road, you pay a fee for the road. If you use the post office, you pay a fee for the post office, not a fee that everybody else pays, but the fee that relates to what you're using it. If you need police protection and you have a nice house, you pay for police protection. If you have a big house and you need more police protection, you pay a bit more. So it's all in retrospect. It's all based in ratio of what you're using. So the problem with government workers is not only are they collecting money then, but they're collecting money for the rest of their lives. Often somewhere between 70 to 90% of their last paycheck. So if a government worker works for 30 years and they live for another 40 years, you have paid almost 2 plus times what their actual paycheck was and their productivity time. So you're paying them so if you get rid of a government worker who is not doing anything, you're actually, look at the amount of money you're saving over the lifetime of that government. Well, here's the second part that's very important. If that government worker now is forced to go into the job market and earn a real job, guess what? Most of the time they'll be earning money doing something productive. So they've moved from the sucking up money part into the productive part of society. So there's so many aspects to how getting rid of bad workers and non-workers and people who get involved in the system and interfere with you getting anything done. I mean, think about it. If you have 10 employees as a government worker, your job is to figure out how to get 20 employees, right? So and I compare this in the charity thing. If I'm on a charity program at a church, a voluntary charity program, I see my success as getting people off the charity program. Right? I'm not talking about a professional nonprofit that collects money to cause problems, right? I'm talking about a church charity, right? But on the other hand, if I'm a government worker and my job is to help people on welfare, my success is based on how many more people I can add to the welfare rolls. I'm not doing the welfare people any help, any favors. I'm doing myself the favor. So you can see how many layers of improvement we get by just firing one government worker.
Yeah. Gotcha. Wow, this has been interesting today. Quite interesting. I've learned a lot. So thank you guys for sharing that. And I think it's important that we talk about your books. So you should always keep your books handy, guys. But Kevin, yeah. There we go.
You want to learn about DEI? DEI and 3D. There you go.
And Woked Up. What else? Look at, he's got them there. Go ahead.
And I don't
You don't have
any
Woked Up
others.
with you. And
No.
what about
Free to be servant and slave. Biblical understanding of our role in Christ. And then the last one I've done, reveal the archetypes of American politics.
That's a nice looking cover there, you know.
Sure is. Beautiful. Beautiful. So so you could get all of those
on Amazon.
Type in my name on Amazon, and you'll get access to any. I've written 8 books, so you'll see all of them, including Woke Up and all those in between from there.
Come on, Neil.
Come on, Neil. We're about to close it, brother.
My other book, I seem to have sold out of them, but we have the Apologetics for Kids. I don't know. Is this backwards on your screen? I can't tell.
It is. It is flipped around, but that's okay. People will see the cover.
I need to put my camera around. I was thinking about that, and then of course there is the Jesus is involved in politics. If you can read backwards, but
and where's your newest one for how to get rid of racism?
Yeah. So then there's the I don't know. As I said, I seem to be run out of copies of it. So I know I have some somewhere, but they're not.
What's the name of it?
How to Stop Racism in America.
Very good. All right, everyone.
All available on Amazon. So
excellent.
And your new book,
it doesn't fall in line with the same. I'm completely fiction here, so you know, you guys have got some tremendous.
They should still know you're an author. You just completed your new book. It's wonderful, and people should be encouraged to see it. If you like Bibles, if you like Bible stories, Bible history, you want to become more literate. She does a wonderful job in this.
The Moses Chronicles. It's one of an 8-book series. So I'm enjoying writing it. So I'm already on book number 2. So that's good. So yeah, and you can find them on Amazon as well. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back again. Send us any comments or messages that you have about this topic or any topic that you would love to see us discuss. All right, everyone.